A quick message from the guy who runs this channel. I'm excited to share that our channel now partners with the author of The Black Ship to share ad revenue. This collaboration ensures that the creative minds behind the stories we love are supported financially. Thank you for helping us give back to the author by watching and engaging with our content. Now let's get back to the story. "You're early," Cynthia commented as she continued to walk, undeterred. Wyatt joined her side. "Friends of yours?" "Hardly," Wyatt replied. "I wanted to know Jincho and the other Ikantis better." "Are you favorable toward the aliens?" Cynthia asked in a nonchalant tone. Wyatt shrugged. "They're not Drazen, and they hate them with a passion. Besides, almost every Ikanti I've met has been pleasant and cordial. I see no reason to dislike them." "Them? I agree. I am talking about the Ikantis in general. Do you know about the hierarchy?" the blue-haired woman asked in that same tone. "Enough to not like it and understand why they left." Wyatt paused for a moment and then turned his gaze to Cynthia. "The principality and the hierarchy don't seem too different. Why are we hostile to each other at all when there are the Erebians and the Drazen out there?" "That, Wyatt, is a long and complicated answer that dates back several millennia and topics that, sadly, you do not have the clearance to know about. Be assured, however, that the hierarchy is much worse than what you believe it is," Cynthia replied, then turned to the two crewmen. "We'll be taking this arena. Make sure none disturb us." "Oh, of course, Lady Cynthia," one of the crewmen replied shakily. Cynthia grabbed the two small tubes the crewman had been carrying on a lavishly decorated red and golden pillow. With the press of a button, the two tubes extended out until they measured 2.5 meters in length. She grabbed one firmly while presenting the other to the black-haired pilot next to her. Blood left Wyatt's face while his eyes inspected the long, thick metal rod, and his imagination painted several scenarios for its use. None of them pretty. "We're not going to practice using these poles, are we?" he asked, his voice slightly shaky as the prospect of being beaten to a pulp by Cynthia with such a sturdy stick was incredibly unappealing. "Fret not, Wyatt, for this is not combat practice," she said without an ounce of humor in her voice. She then hit the ground once with the pole and stood firm, turning to face the pilot in full. "This is something far more important. You will master this performance before we arrive at Matcha. In a few hours, we shall jump to the Felicity system first and contact any Finnegan and Loyalist forces stationed there. Once we make landfall on Matcha, you shall stand alongside my princess." She's calling Clara by her title. She's being beyond serious with this, Wyatt thought, realizing the seriousness of the situation. Granted, he had no idea what sort of performance she was talking about, but he was sure he was about to discover it. Deciding that getting started was better for all involved, he put on his helmet and then hit the ground, doing his best to imitate Cynthia's stance. Understood, Lady Cynthia. I shall not bring shame to Princess Clara and House Astor." Pleased by his response, Cynthia nodded once. "Observe what I do. Learn from it. Then follow my motions. It is imperative that you master this march in the short amount of time available to us, Wyatt. We have less than 3 days." "It shall be done," Wyatt replied, ready to do his best and go beyond that. How hard could learning a march be? "Noir Navio, Command Bridge." Princess Clara Astor sat on the captain's chair while Redford and Cynthia stood next to her. Instead of putting on a dress, she chose to wear her armor instead for their entry into the Felicity system. If she was being honest with herself, she was both elated and nervous in equal measure. After barely escaping the clutches of her uncle, roaming the stars without stop for days on end whilst being hunted down, being rescued by a compost hauler who had proven himself to be not only useful, but a rapidly trusted and sincere friend, and then facing the might of the Kastans and the horrors of the Drazen, she was more than happy to find herself in friendly territory. But the nagging fear that something could go wrong again plagued her mind constantly thanks to the death of Frederick Anderson. The ramifications were many, and all of them were outside her control. All they could do, she concluded, was keep his death a secret for as long as possible and prepare a suitable response to House Anderson. Failure could see them siding with her uncle. Another great house deciding to support Duke Draymor's coup, this time out of scorn for the loss of a potential heir while under capture, could be devastating to the reputation of House Astor itself. It was the sort of diplomatic hellstorm that caused the previous civil war across the Principality, setting it ablaze in the fires of petty squabbles and old feuds revived. Worst of all, there was not much she could do in her current predicament. Yet. Patience was her strongest virtue, and she knew how to wield it with the finesse of an assassin's dagger. Borrowing the perspective from a video feed, she saw Galt Tirome on his post, waiting silently and patiently to carry out his duty. Sparing his life had been the correct choice, and her gamble seemed to be paying off already. Then she saw Captain Milcades alongside half of the Royal Marines at her disposal, standing their ever-faithful vigil. And a little further back stood Wyatt Staples, silently watching and waiting. Seeing him brought a small smile to her lips. He truly was doing his best, despite the severe whiplash he was suffering, now that his worldview and his role in it had changed so abruptly in such a short span of time. But such was life, and Wyatt Staples had proven to be not only reliable, but that rarest treasure of all, a true, trusted friend she could rely upon. Returning to her own perception, she waited and waited for what felt like hours until the awaited ping made itself known. "My princess, we are being hailed," Galt announced. "Open the channel," she commanded, stealing her heart once more. A few seconds later, the large screen before her gave way to the image of an older man with a trimmed mustache wearing the uniform of an admiral. She recognized him immediately. "Admiral Joaquin Finnegan, it is good to see you in good health." "Princess Clara." The stern-looking, gruff admiral's expression shifted to one of joy when he recognized the figure sitting in the captain's chair. "My princess, have you been captured? Do you require assistance?" "Your concern is appreciated, Admiral, but I assure you I am neither a prisoner nor an impostor. This vessel was relinquished from the unworthy hands of the Caiston traitors, and I have taken command of it. Rejoice, Admiral, for my brother, the prince, shall arrive in mere hours. He awaits in the Roble system as we speak. No doubt you've detected our fleet's warp signatures?" Clara asked in a neutral but firm tone. Admiral Joaquin straightened his posture, retaking his noble air. "Forgive me for my outburst of joy, my princess. We feared the worst. Our reports were scattered and inconclusive outside our borders. We received 3 days ago a message from one Uriel Hoax describing that of your arrival at Jintrax's smuggler den and that you and His Majesty the Prince were on their way. We didn't believe it at first, but seeing you now in the flesh, my princess, the Principality is beyond relieved to see you safe and unharmed." The Admiral paused for a moment, his azure eyes flickering for a second before continuing. "We received reports of your fleet's warp signatures, and a task force was going to move and see who you were, but we were countermanded by Fleet Admiral Kisalto Lintar and Marchioness Amelia Finnegan after the second report came through. They believed that it was highly probable that the fleet were loyalist forces trying to remain hidden. We never suspected it was the prince's fleet in actuality," the aged man replied, relief clear in his voice despite how serious and professional he tried to appear. Clara frowned at the Admiral's revelation. "Admiral, what happened to Fleet Admiral Basako Winfield?" "He fell in battle with the highest of honors, my princess," the Admiral replied. "Admiral Casalto was forced to take the mantle of the Second Fleet's leadership after Fleet Admiral Basako perished during an assault carried by traitors' damnable black ships. I'm sorry to report that 2 battlecruisers, 4 heavy and regular cruisers, 10 destroyer-class vessels, and over 30 support and escort ships have been lost. We've inflicted casualties upon the traitors, including the destruction of at least 15 of their black ships and over 20 regular vessels. Sadly, the most significant loss they've received was the destruction of a battlecruiser and heavy damage to the battleship Unrelenting Valor." "I see," Clara replied, taking in every word the Admiral had said. "I will inform Juliana of her uncle's demise. Have the Caiston traitors moved against your forces?" "We're locked in a stalemate, my princess. Our forces are scattered and spread thin. The bulk of our forces are made up from Second Fleet elements under Fleet Admiral Kisalto Lintar. There are also stragglers from the 1st and 8th, with Rear Admiral Moreton Banta as the senior commanding officer of the 8th Elements and Vice Admiral Vashakati Reed under command of the 1st Elements. Several Royal Army elements have also remained loyal and are eager to engage the traitors, but we lack transport vessels." The precious few ships from the 4th and 7th fleets present have joined Finnegan forces directly, while the majority of their forces are scattered across Calon, Valto, and Winfield territories as far as our intelligence reports indicate, the Admiral explained. But now that news of the Prince's survival and arrival will spread across the Principality, we can start pushing back against the traitors and that Draymore bastard. Excuse my outburst, my princess. There is no need to apologize. My uncle is a traitor and deserves little consideration in these dire times that he instigated. Every death is on his hands and that of his supporters, Clara replied in a neutral, practiced tone. Inform Marchioness Amelia Finnegan of our imminent arrival. At once, Your Majesty. However, may I ask, why are you on board a black ship, my princess? Even with our scanners, it was hard to pinpoint the origin of the vessel's warp signature, Joaquin asked, intrigued. Thanks to the efforts of my Royal Marines and Lady Cynthia Winfield, we were able to capture 2 black ships. The smaller, crippled frigate class is in possession of my brother, while this vessel, renamed Nornavio, has become my personal flagship, Clara replied quickly and firmly. Understood, Your Majesty. I shall report this to Marchioness Amelia immediately. I'll order a dozen escort ships to meet the Nornavio at the middle point. Will this suffice, my princess? The Admiral asked. It is more than enough. Thank you, Admiral Joaquin. I look forward to setting foot on Macha soon, Clara said, and with that, the connection ended. A second later, she stood up and Redford took her place. Maintain course and inform me of any significant developments, Commander. My princess, Redford replied, bowing his head slightly. Captain Milcades, you and your troops may return to your duties. Cynthia, Wyatt, come, Clara ordered, and made her way out of the bridge, closely followed by the red-armored woman and the black-haired pilot. They made their way back to her quarters undisturbed by any other crew members and entered. Once the doors closed, she let out a long, tired sigh and placed a hand on her neck. Without saying a word, Cynthia approached from behind and gently rubbed the back of her neck for several seconds until an audible pop was heard. Better? Very much so. I wish there was a way to prevent stress from building up, Clara said, her tone back to her more cheerful, lively self. Then she turned to Wyatt and offered him a gentle smile. You know, you could stand closer to me the next time, Wyatt. You're under my direct service, are you not? I will remember that, Clara, Wyatt replied, feeling nervous. But would that be all right? Compared to Cynthia, Commander Redford, and the Royal Marines, I'm left wanting, he said, barely managing to avoid saying he was nothing instead. True, but I wish for you to stand at my side. I can't have my new star pilot and Knight Banneret on the sidelines now, can I? Clara ended with a playful giggle before taking a seat at her tea table. Tell me and be honest with me, Wyatt. How is your latest training going? The pilot reached for his helmet and removed it. It is agony, Wyatt answered in a heartbeat, which made the princess smirk at her blue-haired friend. For her part, Cynthia took off her helmet and gave him a sharp glare. I'm following my princess's orders, he said, happy to get away with complaining a bit safely. But Clara, is it really necessary for me to be a banner holder? Of course, Clara said, inviting him and Cynthia to sit down with a hand gesture. Her 2 friends took the invitation and joined her. Once we arrive at Macha, we'll wait for my brother's arrival. You, Wyatt, will be part of my escort. That is why you must learn how to do it properly. Funny. Cynthia never mentioned anything about being part of your escort, Wyatt replied as he glanced at said woman. It goes without saying, Cynthia replied with a hint of a smirk present on her lips. Excuse me for my ignorance, but why is it so important? Is it like the parades House Arante organizes? He asked curiously. Not quite. This will not be a parade, but it certainly will be similar. This, my dear Wyatt, will be a rather simple royal procession. She paused for a moment to grab her chin between her index and thumb. Marchioness Amelia would never let such an opportunity slip her fingers. I'm sure that after Joaquin delivers what had transpired, she'll do everything in her power to organize it on such short notice. It'll be fairly traditional, with my brother walking forth, flanked, and followed by his closest and most trusted advisors, followers, and allies. I will follow shortly after in much the same fashion. In comparison to my brother, only 4 banners shall join me. The banners of House Astor, House Winfield, the Royal Marines banner, and of course yours, my dear Wyatt. Wyatt felt dizzy and winded, as if something long, heavy, and sturdy had punched him in the gut. Only nobles were allowed to participate in the parade's back on fire, while commoners cheered and admired it. Now that he fully digested what his role would be, and to what extent, he almost fainted right there and there, but managed to keep himself from embarrassing himself further. "Couldn't you tell me that earlier?" Wyatt shouted in his mind as he shot a shocked yet demanding glare at the blue-haired woman who, to be fair, blushed slightly and looked away, embarrassed. But I don't have a banner," was all he could stammer, but Clara, clearly having prepared for this revelation already, merely reached to her left and lifted a large sealed suitcase of sorts. "On the contrary, Wyatt, I've already approved your design and have taken the liberty to use the fabricator to make your first banner house. Go on, it is yours," she said before putting the suitcase on the empty table. Slowly and with shaking hands, Wyatt reached for the suitcase. He placed his thumb on the scanner and the lock clicked, disengaging. Opening the suitcase, he saw a neatly tucked piece of cloth with the head and neck of a white stag in the center of a black background. The stag had short antlers and a pair of extended wings sprouting from the sides, giving it a rather majestic appeal. Taking the banner out, he unfurled it to reveal it in full. There it was, the heraldic shield he'd spent several hours working on. He was careful to follow the advice of Commander Redford while keeping in mind what Galt Tyrone had told him. Of course, that did very little without a deeper understanding of how he was meant to do it properly. Thanks to Clara and her delivered data chit, that hurdle was easy to overcome. The chit contained a plethora of examples throughout the Principality's history and even before its founding. It also contained depictions of many types of shields, categories, decorations, and animals that, according to the information in the chit, were animals that existed in the distant homeworld of humanity, Earth. Not only that, each depiction also came with a brief description of what each one symbolized and represented. Choosing a stag had not been an easy decision, but he felt drawn to it the more he read through the information. Now that I see it in person, I feel almost embarrassed, like I'm pretending to be something that I'm not, but at the same time. I think it is rather fitting, Wyatt thought, whilst admiring the stag that was meant to symbolize strength, courage, humbleness, loyalty, and nobility. Not in the sense of actual nobility, but in the form of virtue and integrity. The wings on the stag represented not only his love for piloting, but a warning that while he was a man of peace, he would not hesitate to incur in battle. The shape of his shield was described as a two-engrailed top design. It was simple but more refined than the simple heather shield he'd chosen before. At the top center of the shield and above the stag rested a gray Spartan helmet that went along well with the duality and intimidating appearance of the stag beneath it. Finally, on the right and left top sides of the shield, a white staple could be found on each side. There was no fanciful meaning behind them. It was a simple reminder of who he was, where he'd come from, and to never forget it. Outside, the rest of the flag was also white, giving full attention to the heraldic shield at its center. "Simple yet elegant. Nicely done, Wyatt," Cynthia praised, examining his banner. "I don't know what to say except, thank you, Clara. I don't know how, but I promise I'll pay you back someday for everything you've done for me. The chit, the armor, and now this banner. It couldn't be cheap." "Think nothing of the chit," Clara began. "It is nothing more than information already available to me. It cost me nothing to help you in that regard. The banner also cost me nothing. As captain of the Noir Navio, it is within my power to make use of the facilities as I wish. That armor is yours because you paid for it, Wyatt." Now it was Wyatt's turn to let out a laugh. "Clara, please, I'm not that stupid. I have no more than 30,000 credits to my name. Nowhere near enough to pay for such an armor, and I never made the purchase myself. I appreciate your generosity regardless, my princess." "Who said anything about generosity? I simply subtracted the amount from your account. Tell me, what was your salary as a warrant officer?" Clara asked, a cheeky smile forming on her lips. Cynthia shook her head but wasn't able to hide her small, playful smirk. "My salary was 800 credits a month," he answered, and his heart raced with anticipation. "Has my salary increased?" As a lieutenant, your salary is now 4,000 credits a month. Furthermore, due to services rendered to the royal family and your outstanding courage, you've received a reward of 100,000 credits, Cynthia revealed, causing the pilot to sputter and mumble incoherently. The armor you are wearing costs 50,000 credits and has already been subtracted. That means I have over 70,000 credits at my disposal. I can afford to have a video call with my family for a few minutes, Wyatt thought with a triumphant smile spreading across his face. He was about to thank Clara for it, but the princess beat him to the punch. Save your thanks for when they have meaning and merit, my dear Wyatt. This was nothing more than what was needed. Moreover, perhaps you should check your credit chit, Clara proposed, her smile widening whilst Cynthia passed him a data pad. Not bothering to question her motives, Wyatt took out his credit chit and inserted it into the data pad. He never bothered to check his account more than once or twice each month, if that. He accessed his personal account, and true as the daylight, there it was. 78,242 credits. But something was wrong. He blinked twice, set the datapad down, and rubbed his eyes before picking it back up. There was no mistaking it. There was a 0 next to the 7, followed by a comma and a 6 after it. 6 million cred, he muttered in disbelief before his body gave up and he leaned back on his seat, passing out. Clara let out a rather pleased sigh as she giddily clapped her hands together. I rather enjoy when he does that. Cynthia shook her head again. Your senseless teasing and peculiar brand of humor are going to end up killing him, Clara. Shush you, Clara exclaimed, her cheeks blushing, but her smile never faltered. Don't lie to me, Cynthia. I can see your smile. I refuse to acknowledge that statement, Cynthia replied. When he wakes up, you'll have to instruct him on how to employ his newfound wealth. I've already taken that into account, the princess answered, leaning back in her seat to relax. Her gaze focused on the unconscious pilot for a moment, before moving past him and saw a small collection of fighter models resting inside an encased model rack. She loved every one of them and never traveled anywhere without them. It had been a small miracle that a handful of her collection had survived at all during their escape. But recently, a certain model had become her new, most precious possession. We should smile now that we can, Cynthia, for tomorrow is anything but certain. On this channel, we've amassed an extensive library of sci-fi and HFY content spanning thousands of hours, all available for your listening pleasure right now. Take a moment to explore our catalog and discover your new favorite story. You can find links to each story featured in this mosaic in the description below. Remember, what you see here is just a glimpse of the vast array of content we offer.